Welcome back, podcast fans. I'm your host, Annette Hines, and this is Parenting Impossible, the Special Needs Survival Podcast. Today, we are so lucky to have Elaine Jacobs with us, and we're talking about a subject that I don't think in 5 years of doing this podcast I have touched on. We've worked with folks and talked to folks who represent or who've been part of pretty much any disability category that you can think of. But Elaine is here to talk about raising deaf kids. And in fact, that is her website, raisingdeafkids.com. So I've been so excited about this since we met, Elaine. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's so excited to be here. And I think it's been a few years, but I think I saw when I was going through your podcast and checking you out, that I think you had Michelle Hugh on here, but I think it's been a few years for Mama Who
That's
Hears,
right.
which I know her. She's fantastic.
You
So
know
I think
why
you
I
had
didn't
her.
think of her, though? She's a doctor. So,
She's an audiologist,
you
yeah.
know, so
But
I
she's
was,
also, she's got the cochlear implant. So she's not a parent of children who are deaf, but she has a really good kind of perspective on
yes,
the experience of being deaf and growing up, which is
that
great.
you're right. That was a great podcast. And she has a great course that you can go through. I actually paid for it and took
Yes.
it because I thought it was phenomenal. I learned so much,
Yes, she's
even
great.
though I don't have deaf children, but I always like to hear advocacy tips, especially from the professionals, because they
Yeah,
really know how to maneuver through the ins and outs of this world. So,
absolutely.
okay,
It's their world.
it's their
So they can
world
give
for
you
sure.
little tips and tricks.
Yeah. Well, let's kind of take a step back. I've already told the audience that you are parenting deaf children, but why don't we just, kind of get some background? Give us a little bit about your family.
Yeah, so I have three kids. They're 8, 6, and 3. So we're still kind of in the little
Woo.
stages. And my two boys who are 8 and 6 now, they were my children who were born deaf, and they both have cochlear implants. And so when I say that they were born deaf, they were born with the official diagnosis is called profound sensorineural hearing loss, which basically means that they could hear no speech. So they couldn't hear anybody talking. For all intents and purposes, they were deaf because they could probably hear before they got their cochlear implants. The audiologist put it to us like maybe an airplane if it was turned on and they were standing right beside it. So certainly when we're talking about language and developing language skills, which my kids were diagnosed from birth. So the 0 to 5 age is the age where you typically think of those language skills,
Yes.
really getting a boost and really developing. And that's why in the hearing loss world, they want to get kids identified as early as possible to give you as much help with boosting those language skills early, which 100% makes sense if you know about, language and how that works.
Right.
Um, so when we were talking about language, they could hear no language, and so then, we went into, what do we want to do about it? So we chose cochlear implants for both of our kids. And I would say it is definitely something to think about. It does involve, pretty major surgery for your kids. We have not regretted it. We love it. Our boys love to wear their cochlears. They like to access that sound. And for us, our first child was the first person ever in our family who was born with hearing loss. So we came into this shocked because you don't know. It's not something that you can check for before a baby is born. So you don't know until your baby is born that they have hearing loss or not. They don't act any differently when you're pregnant with them. They don't really act any differently when they come out. There's no way to know unless you get that newborn hearing screening, which I tell all parents to get because information is better than
Mhm.
anything. And it's a non-invasive. They just put it looks like little earbuds into the baby's ears just when they're in the hospital. They can be in the room with you, and they just play sounds and they just see how the baby's brain reacts to it. The baby can be asleep. It doesn't hurt the baby, but it starts giving you an indication of does the baby have typical hearing, or is there some possible hearing loss? And then, if it is, like, our boys failed their newborn hearing screening, so they couldn't hear any of it, which later we understood. Um, if there's like an abnormality in the screening, the hospital will refer you to audiologists and speech therapists and kind of move you on from there. And it's, like I said, it's always better to know and have
Yeah.
information about your children, because the more information you have, you can move forward with that. Um,
So Elaine,
yeah.
though, one
Mhm.
question about that. Is this not
Yeah.
routinely done in every hospital when children are newborns?
It used to not be. Now it is, I believe I want to say, I'm not sure if it's a state by state case.
Mhm.
I know that the EDI program, which is the early hearing detection and intervention program, which every state has, it's a state funded organization, and every state has an EDI program, um, which connects with the parents of kids who have hearing loss and helps them find the different services in their state that they would need to be supported with. I know the EDI program has worked really hard in all states to make sure that all hospitals are doing this, and this is a routine part of all the other little tests that they do when a baby is first born. So I think it is now. It definitely, in my state of North Carolina, it is routine
Mhm.
to do, but there are cases, as with other kind of routine things, parents can always opt out of them. So a parent can say, well, I don't want that done, and they won't do it, which is why I like to educate parents of even kids who, have typical hearing, to get that done, because it's a non-invasive, you know,
Right,
procedure, and
right,
it's a non-invasive test, and having that information, and then, best case scenario, your kid has fine hearing, and then you
right.
move on. So it is routinely done, but it is one of those things that parents can opt out of as well. So I just
Okay.
encourage parents to not opt out of it.
Yeah, that seems so strange to me. I couldn't imagine a reason why you wouldn't, but I suppose there are always people who have their thoughts and their feelings about different tests and things like that.
Mhm.
So can we talk about cochlear implants for a minute? Because I know
Yeah.
that can be somewhat controversial, or it has been in the past. Um, what is the basis of, the sort of disagreements around cochlear implants?
Yeah. So there is kind of in the hearing loss world, and I don't really, you could maybe tell me better. I don't recognize that there's such a stark division in
Mhm.
other, disability circles. It seems like, for the most part, professionals, parents, people who grow up with the, disability medical challenge, they're kind of all going down the same path.
Mhm.
And they kind of mostly all agree and are kind of together. And the hearing loss world is really interesting because there are some stark divisions in it. And I am always curious about it too. Um, so the medical world, speech therapists, audiologists, medical world are, very pro technology. It provides hearing access to kids, like my kids who had no hearing and now they can hear, different sounds and different, speech voices. Um, there are members of the deaf community who I think have not embraced the technology yet. And we do have to remember this is still a pretty new technology,
Yes.
relatively. I think the first implant was in like the 80s, maybe the 70s, but I don't think they really started routinely using cochlear implants until like the 80s and 90s.
Mhm.
And even then, I think it was mostly in adults.
Mm.
And so I think it's really been since the 90s, maybe even the later mid to later 90s, that they have been using cochlear implants in children to get them that hearing access and that language earlier
Early.
on.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Sure.
which makes sense. So, really, relatively speaking, this technology has not been around. Now, hearing aids have been. Um, and there doesn't seem to be such a disagreement about using hearing aids, but
Right.
I suppose cochlear implants do involve a surgery. They involve implanting something into you, and So that can be it. I think what the deaf community, the sense that I get when I have spoken to other deaf adults, is the deaf community, the people who are not as for the technology, I think they see it as a kind of backlash to the type of life they've been living. And when you talk to deaf adults, they see themselves as like there's not a problem. Like hearing
Right.
loss is not a problem for them. They can navigate the world, they can communicate with people, they're doing just fine. And that's true. And so I think they see it as kind of like a stick into their community and kind of saying
Mhm.
that the way that they have been living and their lifestyle isn't okay and it's less than. And you're right,
Yeah.
the deaf community, you talked about that earlier, is very big on this is not a disability. This is, like a normal part of life. And, having kids with hearing loss, I can see that. I don't consider that there's anything wrong with them necessarily, or that this is anything bad. Now, my opinion has changed over the past 8 years. I've been doing this with my kids. My opinion wasn't so much that when we first started out. When we first started out, it was a shock. We never had hearing loss in our family. And all
Right.
of a sudden, my 2-month-old baby, I'm a new mom, um, and my 2-month-old baby, they tell me can't hear. And then it's like, do you want to get cochlear implants? And that's going to involve a surgery when he's 11 months old. And then that is going to involve, which I later found out, no one told me this, but like years of speech therapy for
Mhm.
him, which is a big commitment. And um, it's a big thing. So, I think that is what it is just for the deaf community, it's like a contrast to what they've known as their regular life. So I think,
Mhm.
some members are having trouble embracing that because it's almost like their view is the medical field is saying there's something wrong with hearing loss and they need to
Right.
fix it. And
Yeah.
cochlear
So that's
implants and hearing aids are fixing the
right.
deafness. And the message from the deaf community is we don't need fixing, we're fine.
That's
So
exactly
that
what
that's
I have experienced.
where it's
Yeah.
coming from. Yeah.
And that is not universal, just like in every disability community, there is not universality in the way that anybody feels about language
Yeah.
and self-identification. But I have known, um, many people in the hearing loss community that think of being deaf as the same as having brown eyes and blonde hair, that
Mhm.
it is just part of who they are. And you can even find
Yes.
that in the blind community as well. Um, so they don't identify sometimes as a person with a disability, and
Correct. Hmm.
therefore they don't appreciate, you know, the idea that they can be fixed.
Yes.
So
That is it's the message.
yeah,
Yeah. I think if the technology came with a different message um to parents, then members of the deaf community would be more likely to embrace the technology if it didn't come with the message of we're fixing this because there's something wrong. I
it's
agree.
so interesting because, you think about how many people wear glasses
Mhm.
to,
Me,
to
I've
try
got him
to
on.
see better, right?
Mhm.
And it's not like, oh my gosh, there's something so wrong with you because your eyesight's not perfect.
Right.
If you have less hearing than, the average person, and you can correct that, it would, to me,
Yeah.
it feels the same. But I am not someone with a hearing loss. So
Mhm.
it is sometimes a little difficult to sort of understand that. But respecting
Yeah, I mean,
everyone's choices for sure.
yeah, I agree with that. And yeah, respect everyone's choices. And I don't want to put everyone in the deaf community in a box because there are some, many adults who, spent their whole life deaf and chose to get cochlear implants later in life when they were
Right.
adults. Michelle Hugh was one of them who was on here, and she had hearing aids when she was growing up, but she got cochlear implants when she was in her 20s, and she's
Right.
very happy with them. So it's definitely you can't put everybody in a box, and it's not everyone. And I mean, you're right. When you get a group together, you're always going to have, different opinions, different choices, and that's fine. But I agree with you, obviously, because we did get our children cochlear implants. It is, I would, you wouldn't tell someone that their child, if they needed a walker to walk better, not to give them that because
Right.
they're fine and we've grown up not doing that. You would say, yeah, whatever is going to help them, you know, move around better. And yeah, same
Mhm.
thing. Your eyeglasses example was on point. Like, I have been wearing glasses since I was in kindergarten. I'm wearing them now because I can't see without them. So why would my parents have said, "Oh, we'll just like make do other people have it?"
Right.
It's the same logic is like, "Oh, well, other people have not been able to see and they've left lived a normal life, so
Mhm.
you don't need glasses even though you do." So it's an interesting message.
Mhm.
And I think that is, changing with the parents
I
now. I mean, I
agree.
think parents are wanting to give their children, access and a chance to be able to hear.
Mhm.
And later in life, I've met deaf adults who have cochlear implants and they just choose not to wear them because they don't like them. That's fine. So, so you're still giving your child choices, and later in life when they're an adult, they can choose, when to wear them, not to wear them.
Right.
My kids do that now. There are times there is such a thing as hearing fatigue,
Mm.
in adults and kids who are wearing hearing aids and cochlear implants. And there's even a little thing called a baha. I don't know about those as much, but it's another hearing device that I believe is like a bone conductive thing that's kind of in the back. So um but uh noise and everything travels differently
Yeah.
through those devices. And there is like kind of two skills involved when we're talking about devices for kids and
Mhm.
adults. There is the hearing, but there's also the understanding, and those two different skills. Because you can hear a noise but
Mhm.
not understand. You can hear a different language, but you don't know, what they're saying, or you can't figure out where a word ends, where a word begins because you don't know it. And that's kind of the same thing. So,
Right.
they're kind of having to work double to hear and then also to make sense and understand what they're saying and hear the different syllables and consonants
Mhm.
and vowels. So that's a completely different skill. And it tires out the brain
Yeah.
sometimes, which makes sense. So,
Yeah.
my kids, at least my 8-year-old in his IEP, and just I've worked out with his teachers that he tells them if he needs a break from hearing, and they'll allow him to take off his cochlears if he just needs
Mhm.
some silence. Usually, if they're doing like individual work or worksheets, he can do that. And we, allow them to do it at home. A lot of times when they come home from school, they might take them off for a little bit because they've been hearing all day and understanding all day
Yes.
and they're a little fatigued, and that's fine with us. And then certainly they don't sleep with their cochlears on. And especially my 8-year-old, before he goes to bed, he likes to wind down without them.
Mm.
And so he takes them off and he'll read to himself in bed. It's really cute.
Mm.
And he'll read books in bed and have his little snack. But there's a certain time of night that when we try to put the cochlears back on them, he doesn't want them, because I think he's like winding down. That's part of his like wind down, quiet down
Oh, that's so
process too.
interesting. And so
Yeah, it's
cool
cute.
that at 8 years old, he's really figuring out his path, and what works
Mhm.
for him. That's really amazing.
Yeah, I mean, they learn it pretty quickly. I mean, our kids both, got their cochlears when they were 11 months old. So this is really all they know and remember is having the cochlears. And, we've always kind of allowed them to kind of monitor themselves with it. But even as like, I'd say by the time they're two, they understood when they like wanted them off or on
Mhm.
the back on. Also, I mean, I will say when, they've gotten mad, they've like thrown them off or didn't want to hear us. So they often also get crafty with them, which I hear from a lot of parents too. That if like you're fussing at them or they don't want to hear what you're saying, they just like take them off and they're like, can't hear you. So
Mhm.
they figure that out pretty quickly too. But yeah, giving them that space. I think we've always just given them that space to be able to monitor that, because that's not something that we can monitor for them. We don't know when they're fatigued with
Right.
hearing and listening. And so we've always allowed them to monitor that. But for the most part, they like hearing,
Mhm.
and they want to be included. Not that of course we include them through other ways if they don't have on their cochlears, but
Right.
In the mornings, they both come and like bring me their cochlears. They can't quite put them together yet, but that takes a lot of like fine motor skill. But they'll bring me all this stuff to like put it together, or they'll like point to their head and they'll want them on. So they usually, in most cases, ask for them to be on if they're off.
Mhm. Are they learning backup skills like signing and things like that?
Yes. So the interesting thing about the hearing technology, as I learned later, is that it actually does not fix the hearing, because when my boys take off their cochlears, they are deaf, so they cannot hear at all. Um, so it's an interesting line that people with cochlear implants and kids with cochlear implants kind of straddle, because they can hear, but then they can also not hear. And so
Mhm.
they are kind of straddling the line of like the hearing world and the deaf world, because they're kind of both, depending
Okay.
on. And it's also, hearing is very nuanced, which I've just learned as I've gone on this journey with two kids having cochlear implants. And the fact is, my 8-year-old hears very well with his cochlears. He hears everything, like all the speech sounds, we would say. So he has access to hearing, anything that you would be saying. Now, I said the understanding part is, a little bit different. That's a different skill, but he can hear, every single thing that you're saying with his cochlears, because he has a strong cochlear nerve, which of
Uh-huh.
course is where the sound makes sense, where the sound travels in the ear. Now, my 6-year-old was much smaller when he was born, and he was born with not as strong of a cochlear nerve. In fact, the
Okay.
ENT was honest with us. He wasn't positive that cochlear implants were going to work well with him,
Okay.
because it just was not as robust of a cochlear nerve. And so he was concerned about how much sound would be able to travel through the nerve, what would be going on. So this is where we say that, I will have to say, with the medical teams, they are kind of presenting cochlear implants and hearing aids to parents as like, this is going to fix your hearing, your kids' hearing. They're going to be like other regular hearing kids. And it's not always the case. So
Right.
some kids have really great hearing with cochlears, and other kids, like my 6-year-old, still have hearing deficits even with the cochlear. So,
Okay.
come to find out, when I had my second one, it's not a one size fits all thing.
Right.
It is
Right.
nuanced, and parents really need to know that. And I think the medical teams could be much better at explaining that to parents, that,
Mhm.
you know, it depends on, how your brain receives the sounds and your anatomy. It depends on a lot of different things, and is very like personal to everyone how they're hearing or
Yeah.
not. So my 6-year-old does still have hearing deficits. We felt like it was still worth it to get his implants, and I still think it was, because he can still hear, but he probably um, misses out on some sounds. So he might get like half a word, but he has trouble hearing sounds like the S sound or the F sound, because they are like softer sounds. So he actually uses American Sign Language, ASL, to communicate. He actually doesn't speak. So, doesn't speak much. He says some
Mhm.
words, but he's, for being a 6-year-old, I've never heard him say like a complete sentence or anything like that, but he signs it. My 8-year-old fully talks, and I think he knows a few signs. We're working on, we started with signing with all of our kids when they were young, before they could verbally communicate, because
Mhm.
babies can sign and make the signs and understand the signs before they can like verbally say the word. And
Yes.
so it just helps fill in that communication gap. It was really great. So my oldest, though, at some point when he started really learning language, because he can hear everything, he kind of, the signs fell away for him, which is fine, because he just talks now. And that's faster for him and easier for him. And that's like what he prefers. So he knows a few signs. He doesn't do them as much. He understands them more. So when he doesn't have his cochlears on, and I sign things like more, eat, bedtime, bath time,
Yeah.
he understands them, but then he'll talk back to me, like verbally. So he is, and we're working on that with him, but also I'm not going to force him but you can't force someone to learn a language or not learn a language or,
Right.
do whatever. So, of course, we are signing all the time with our 6-year-old, and he sees that. And I teach the other kids signs, I get them involved. But I can't make him do the signs. And that'll have
Right.
to be something as he gets older and he wants to communicate with his brother more that he'll have to learn. Now, he also writes. I mean, at this point, he writes, he reads. So he can read captions. He can read, like when we're in church and like singing, they
Mhm.
have the words and he like reads and he can also like write to you. So there are different ways that we can communicate with
Right.
him and that
Right.
he can communicate. And like I said, he understands some the signs, but then he'll like talk them back to you. And that's just how he prefers to communicate. And talking,
Mhm.
that's fine. Like that's what he wants to do. So my 6-year-old does sign.
Mhm.
So we have a completely different communication plan for the 6-year-old, and
Yeah.
he is not as verbal because he cannot hear as well. And he does sign, and he signs at school as well. And he signs consistently to us, and we sign consistently to him. And that's how we can communicate. And that's helpful because we can sign to him whether or not he has his cochlears on. And that has been helpful on more than one occasion.
Mhm.
When he just didn't feel like wearing them or was mad and didn't want to put them on, I could still get the message across to him.
Well, let me ask you this. I know that you have made the jump from being the mom and learning all of this stuff and advocating for your own kids to really wanting to extend and help other families. When did you decide to do that? And what was that thought process like? What was that, kind of light bulb moment where you said, I'd really like to share everything that I've learned?
Yeah, so I think it really started a couple of years ago when, so in North Carolina, we have local like meetup groups and support groups for parents of kids with hearing loss in like different parts of our state. So I live in the Triangle region of North Carolina, and I was a part of that group. It's mostly like on Facebook. I was a part of it for a while just as a parent, and the admins were looking for some new admins. So every now and then,
Yeah.
every couple of years, we try to flip the admins. And this is all parent run, by the way, not
Mhm.
like run by an organization, not sponsored. This started in North Carolina in 20 years ago by parents of kids with cochlear implants because
Mhm.
there was no like support system of parents helping parents.
Right.
And these groups have not only spread, now we have 7 groups over the state of North Carolina. They're all run and started by parents
Mhm.
and no other like organizational input. Each like admin group, they train the new parents. We like onboard the new parents, and it's been just handed down from like parent to parent. But it's a really cool system that we got in North Carolina. And a couple of years ago, the admins were looking for new admins. And, I just kind of had the feeling or the nudge that this would be a fun thing to do. It's like a part-time thing. It's a
Mhm.
volunteer thing. It's basically running the, Facebook group, hosting a couple of meetings, meetups, it'd be really fun. I was looking for some extra something to do because my kids were getting a little bit older at the time. I know they're still young, but they weren't quite as needy. They were getting into school. And
Yeah.
I was looking, I'm always like looking for a project. I like to stay busy. So I was like, okay, now that I've got some breathing room, like, what do I do now? And so that was a really fun thing where I'm like, oh, I could go do this. I could like help other parents. It's like 5 minutes a day, 5 to 10 minutes a day. It would
Mhm.
be really easy. And I would love to help out other parents because it was really helpful to me when I was first starting this to talk to some parents about it. And I know I had a couple of parents that our speech therapist office gave me so that I could ask them different questions about
Right.
like, I don't know, schooling or just like what to expect, like,
Mhm.
what to do because parents tell you different things than the professionals tell you.
Right.
Um,
Not
because they're really
always right,
with
by the
it.
way.
Yes, that is true. But they are, you know, they are living it every day with their kids. So they can
Yeah.
tell you the practical things of like, okay, this is what the speech therapist is telling you to do. Like now, how do you do this like practically in your home and things like
Yes.
that. And it was really helpful for me to talk to other parents who were just a little bit further ahead because it just shows you, when you're a new parent going through all this, it's really overwhelming to you. And it just kind of shows you that you can get through it. You
Yeah.
can get to the other side. Things do get better. They do get a little bit easier. You learn to live with the hearing loss in your family. You've learned how to navigate with your kids. And so they are really an example of where you can get to, if you're not there now, because they did it, so you can do it too. And so that's where I started, was just helping out, volunteering, in my state, just, helping out, answering questions, and facilitating the group. And then it kind of moved on from there. The Eddie program in North Carolina approached me and asked me if I would be one of their like part-time parent consultants, which is basically the same thing, kind of working with parents, consulting with them, and then also going to kind of meetings with, the Eddie group and the professionals. And I'm kind of the parent voice in those meetings where, they want to implement something new. Then I say, okay, this is or is not going to work for parents, and why, or this is how we change it to make this easier for parents, like wanting to adopt this new program, or, I'm connected with the parents. This is what they're saying that they want, or this is the support that they're saying that they need right now. Let's, figure that out. So I am always a champion of the parents. I love my parents and love helping them. And then, I just decided that I could do this for more parents, because I'm also I have been, in the other Facebook groups, just, on Facebook, of parents of kids with hearing loss. And there are just so many questions that you have when you're a new parent. And, different states have different levels of support. So some parents don't have as, high of a level of support as I think we have in North Carolina. But also, if you live in like a rural area, you don't get as much. And we have that issue in the state of North Carolina. We have a lot of rural areas that, the school system doesn't really know how to like navigate the hearing loss. There are not very many, speech therapists, audiologists. Sometimes the quality in those areas of professionals are not as good as, the bigger areas where the teaching hospitals are. And so, I just noticed as I was in the groups that parents are getting a lot of misinformation, a lot of wrong information, or not getting information at all. And then I was like, well, the groups are great, but then when you post, you're getting like 100 different answers. Which I feel like is also overwhelming. And they're all competing answers. Because different parents do different things, which is totally appropriate. Because everybody has different kids, everybody has a different family life and context. And so how do you say you're still at square one? Because you're like, I'm getting all this information. So I was like, I can help parents, zero in and figure out what's right for their family. And that's really what I help parents do, is zero in, make a plan on what communication is appropriate for your child and appropriate for your family. Because the family has to implement this too, which people forget about. So what's going to work for everybody? How do you, I help people navigate the medical system. I help them navigate the educational system, which is a whole thing. And I used to be a teacher, not a special education teacher, but I used to be a high school teacher. So I do know a little bit more about like the general education system, and I love education still. But so, that's why it just kind of started organically as like volunteering and just saying, oh, I can do this. And I really like connecting with parents and talking with parents and meeting their kids and, hopefully helping them have what is otherwise kind of a difficult time. Making it easier for them and, less overwhelming, and giving them that example of, look where you can be, like the possibility of like, you can get through this and you can like figure this out, and making it easy for them. I feel like, the professionals, sometimes they know too much and they make it a little complicated for parents. So I like to streamline.
Experienced that for sure.
Streamline the steps.
I want to tell everybody how they can find you. So raisingdeafkids.com. It's a great website. It's beautiful. I love it. And
Thank you.
Elaine has a blog with a lot of great information, and also a podcast that she started. I think you started this year, right? with your
Yeah,
podcast?
in October. Yep. So October will be a year.
So Raising Deaf Kids podcast, it's all about getting the information because information is
Yeah,
power, really.
absolutely.
And you are going to hear differing opinions. You are going to
Mhm.
hear different options and choices. And then you do need to narrow it down. If you feel like it would be helpful to you to work one-on-one with a coach, Elaine is doing that too. So she has, was talking about how she can work with families and present them with the same options that they're getting when they get 100 responses back to their question in the Facebook group, but help them narrow down, what's right for them and where they want to go with all of this. So I highly recommend that you go check out the podcast and her website. And since we're running out of time, which always happens to me, I love
I
doing this
know, me
podcast,
too.
but always, I really don't want to leave this podcast without, thinking about the newly diagnosed family. And you have so much experience now and you've been there and met with so many families. What would be like your 2 or 3 tips for a family that's newly diagnosed that they should really hold on to so they can navigate this new space that they're in, just like you had to? And I heard you say throughout this interview that there were things that the doctors didn't tell you, that the therapist didn't tell you, that the schools didn't tell you, and so you sort of had to learn this from other families and from your own experiences. So let's try to narrow that gap for other families. What would you say would be your tips?
So my number one tip is actually when you first get that diagnosis to um wait a minute. To really fully absorb the diagnosis. I say grieve through it. It may not be a full grief process for you. It is for some parents. It just kind of depends on how you react to the news, if you
Yeah.
were expecting it. And different parents experience different emotions at the
Mhm.
beginning. And that's okay. All of the emotions are fine. There's no one way to do this. But to really just sit and feel whatever you need to feel and really
Right.
take a day or two with no action, because your baby's fine, your kid's fine
Right.
for a day or two. We're good. And just really kind of sit with it and just absorb it.
Right.
Um,
Right.
because this is a big thing and it is life changing for your family and it is going to bring some different considerations for your kid and
Mhm.
for you as a parent and as a family, some different ways of navigating through life. And so I think at first you need to just sit with the fact that things are going to be different than you thought they were going to be.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's my biggest tip that nobody tells parents because when you get the diagnosis, so many things kick into action. They want like
Mhm.
appointments and this and that, and you kind of get lost in all of it. Lots of different organizations start contacting you. You
Mhm.
get lost in because you're new to all of it and you get lost and overwhelmed and who is this, what do they do, what do these people
Right.
do, how I didn't even understand at first the difference between an audiologist and a speech therapist, and they do
Mhm.
two very different jobs, but I use them interchangeably, which is not correct, but it's fine because I didn't know anything.
Right.
So sit with that and just take a beat first, and take a breath before you start navigating the other systems.
That's
That's
a
honestly my
That's
biggest tip.
amazing. That's really
Yeah.
great information. So if I can just parrot back what I heard you say is that you said stop, take a beat, and check in with yourself about how
Yeah.
am I feeling? And there's no right way to feel. You may not
Right.
have that complete overwhelm, disconnect, and feeling like you're grieving a loss of some expectation that you had. Not everybody
Yes.
does, but it's important to just check in with yourself, your partner, if you have one, about, where you're at before you take those next steps. What would
Yeah.
that next step be? What's the next tip that you have?
So I think the next step, the next couple of things, which could probably be done in tandem, is one, I would try to find a community locally to you.
Mhm.
Online communities are fantastic. I have one, I love it, but nothing beats a local community that knows the specific resources in your state, because they're
Sure.
different state by state and community by community, and who can walk alongside with you. You can meet in person for coffee. you know, and you can chat with them. It's usually probably going to be, you know, a parent who's a couple of years in to this, even, you know, who can help talk you through the emotions, understand where you're going. So connecting with, you know, some type of community. And most all states have like a Hands and Voices organization, which is a really great organization, or they have some sort of support group for parents. So I would go in there and just start asking questions, or just start asking for encouragement, seeing if someone wants to meet you for coffee, if that's what you want to do, and start connecting with other parents, because you learn so much from
Yeah.
other parents. And that's actually researched, that parents get more information from parent to parent support than like even parent professional, because it's just a different type of support.
It is. It is.
Taking a beat and then getting that community around you is essential. And then just start, you know, walking through appointment by appointment, like take it one appointment at a time. And one service at a time. Figure, you know, that out, what you're going to do, and then move on to the next one, just like, you know, one step at a time from there.
Amazing. I love that. Those are two really great tips and things that I wish somebody had told me when my kid was newly diagnosed. And we went through
Yeah.
stages of diagnoses, so it was very interesting for us.
Yeah.
Well, I will have all of Elaine's contact information in the show notes. Please do reach out to her. This parenting journey can be very lonely at times, and you may be in an area where you don't have such a community, or maybe you're not ready for that larger community yet, and you just need one-on-one support. So Elaine's there for you. Please check out her podcast, Raising Deaf Kids, and her website, raisingdeafkids.com. And Elaine, I'm always so excited when I meet another parent who took their journey and transformed it into something that's helping others. So thank you so much for being on the show, and thanks for all that you do.
Thank you. Thank you. It was fun. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. We'll talk soon, because I'm going to be on Elaine's podcast soon.
Yay, I'm
So I'm very
excited.
excited about that. Thank you. Bye.